Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And let's talk about a sick day routine because I'm not feeling great today.
What is your sick day routine?
So, sick day routine for me is usually not probably sleeping as much as I should, but watching a lot of shows that I've been meaning to catch up on. And then food obviously becomes a big part. But what's your sick day routine?
My sick day routine is a lot of sleep.
Yes.
Staying in bed, being all cozied up, being my own burrito or cocoon. And while I'm in bed, I'm also scrolling through my phone. And that can be like reading an ebook, listening to a podcast, or scrolling through Instagram.
And you can sleep for a while.
Oh yeah, I love sleeping. I love napping. It is my personal self-care language.
Yeah, and I think I've caught COVID about 3 times now, I think. Just different times, just because I work in healthcare, so it's just bound to happen.
Yeah.
But I think when those times happen, I've listened and relied a lot on podcasts. One time I got through all of Euphoria, which I don't recommend if you're sick to watch a very dramatic show. This time I'm watching
The Last of Us.
The Last of Us, that's what it is. And if y'all haven't really caught on, I'm terrible at memorizing things, which is why Jamae fills in about half the details on things.
Yes, we fill each other's sandwiches.
Yes.
Or finish each other's sandwiches.
You can fill my sandwich, I'll eat it. But speaking of which, so sick routine for me, if I'm talking about food-wise, one of my favorite dishes to eat is a Korean dish with game hen, and you stuff it with like this broken rice, and the soup has like dried dates, it has jujubes, it's called samgyetang. It's super good. It's this really comforting soup. Either that, I'll hit porridge sometimes, or honestly, like true sick day food for me is anything fried, anything that's really just easily edible that brings joy to me.
For sure. And that reminds me of like what my sick day food is, which is terrible for the body, but the sicker I am, the more I want ice cream.
Oh no.
And the creamier the ice cream, so the stuff that you shouldn't be putting into your body is exactly what I stuff my face with.
Which isn't great for you.
No, but it's soul food. It makes my heart, it makes my spirit happy, and like you said, you're already in a down mood. So I want to uplift in any way that I can, and that is the way that my soul needs uplifting.
Which is also something I feel like is talked about a lot in Asian cultures, is don't eat dairy when you're sick.
Right.
I'm curious, because there's a lot of Asian sayings, which maybe we'll do that on a different podcast.
Oh, totally.
Because there's some interesting things that I think our parents have told us that are very much spread around Southeast Asian cultures.
Yes.
But one of the things, like I said, that I love to do when I'm sick is dive into a lot of television. And that leads us to our recommendation for the week.
What is our recommendation for the week?
So our recommendation for this week is K-dramas.
Yes!
It's one of those things where wherever you put your viewership into is where big companies will throw their cash into. So the more we watch these things, the more they'll want to the more they'll want to continue to promote these.
And fund them, Yeah,
and fund them. We have gone into more K-dramas since the pandemic just because they're more available and there's some really fun ones out there.
Yes.
Usually I think we get our recommendations from Jamae's family, who sends them our way.
Yes.
But some of my favorites have been Crash Landing on You.
Yes, that's my favorite. I've watched it 3 times and I'm about to watch it again.
And then the other one is one we just finished up is Extraordinary Attorney Woo.
So good.
Yes, Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha. And Move to Heaven.
That one's a little bit of a downer, just so y'all know if you haven't watched it yet, but it touches your heart and it makes you rethink life.
But it's also the trope of, like, K-dramas, just like Lifetime movies, I think, have their own tropes.
Mm-hmm.
All the ones I've listed are more rom-com dramas.
Most of them.
Yeah, there are some good ones that are also just drama, which are, like, Squid Game. There's one with zombies that was supposed to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
There's DP, which is more military-based.
Right.
But we happen to just go along with more of the rom-com.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because it's feel good for the most part, until they break up and then come back together again.
Yeah, exactly. It's the trope. It's the exact same story. Sometimes, a lot of times, there's that point where somebody passes away that's very heartbreaking, but draws the two closer together.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's plenty out there. All the ones I've listed are more Netflix based.
Yes.
But plenty of dramas out there. Plenty of ways to consume them. I just don't know how, so I just tend to go through Netflix.
Also, if you would like more of the classics or want to try more of the classics, Goong, or I think the English translation is Princess Hours, that was my gateway into K-drama. So,
that one.
That's my highly recommend.
There's also Coffee Prince, which is really popular.
Yes, I also like Coffee Prince. Unfortunately, this was back before streaming, and you had to get the DVDs, and I only had access to the first 2 episodes. So I do hope to actually watch the whole thing, but the start was pretty good.
She had an Espresso Prince.
Yes.
There's Boys Over Flowers was a huge one when we were growing up.
Yes, there was also Full House, not the one with the Olsen twins, but
Yes.
Full House, the K-drama with Rain. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, find one that works for you. It's really fun diving into a completely different story and a different world that you can kind of envelop yourself in.
Right. And for those who are fellow Filipinas, K-dramas have all the kilig. It makes you want to fall in love.
You have to say what kilig is.
Yeah, kilig is like that feeling of... Kilig is that feeling of wanting to fall in love or wanting to feel loved and feeling that warm, fuzzy romance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's your recommendation for the week. And so to continue with our book, Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, we have just gone through chapters 8 through 12. And Jamae, can you recap so far what's been happening?
Yes. So we're in the setting of Shaker Heights, Ohio. We talked about the characters and their relationships, specifically the main characters, which are the Warrens, Mia and Pearl. Mia is the mother of Pearl, who is a sophomore in high school. And the Richardsons, which is a family of 6. Elena is the mother. Bill is the father.
Bill. Also William, I think, is his name
Gotcha.
that they've mentioned in the story.
Definitely. And then the 4 children, Lexi, Trip, Moody, and Izzy. And all of them have their own unique characteristics, and they also have very unique relationships with each other, specifically with Izzy. Izzy is the odd one out among the siblings, and so far what has happened at the end of chapter 7 was Izzy pulled a big prank at school with the help of Moody and Pearl, but inspired by Mia, Pearl's mother. So it left us off there with that big prank. The book just introduced all of the main characters and showed us a little bit about what the relationships look like amongst each other.
Yeah, and I feel like diving into these 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 5 chapters,
Yes.
I think it's really starting to develop the plot line more than just the characters.
Definitely.
I think there are some pretty big moments that have happened along the way.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ones that has happened so far is when the kids go to the museum. So when, I think it was Izzy and Pearl, was Moody there too?
Yes.
Yeah. And then they end up walking around and then they see that photo.
Izzy was not there yet. Pearl and Moody were on a field trip.
Right. And then they drag them back. No, it was
Later, they asked Lexi to bring them
Yes.
back, and Izzy wanted to come along.
Yes. But the picture that they see is of a mother and child, and the mother is holding the child. It's a grayscale image, them sitting in a chair, skyscrapers in the back, and it's done by an artist named Pauline Hawthorne. The photo is titled Virgin and Child Number 1, shot in 1982.
Definitely, and it's from a collection of other art inspired by Madonna and Child.
And so this is going to be one of our big focus points, I think, going into the rest of the story. It starts Miss Richardson on her journey to start discovering about the past of Mia and Pearl and the Warrens. What did you think of this encounter with the photo and how the kids found it?
I think it was a lucky coincidence, considering that the Warrens, Pearl and Mia, just moved to this place, that Pearl and Moody are on this field trip, and essentially they're in the middle of nowhere in a very idyllic neighborhood. And despite it being a lucky coincidence, I also think that it felt very, it felt like it was meant to be. Like it was fate that they were going to come across it, and it was meant for Pearl specifically to find it.
I think the same thing, which is why I kind of had an issue with the way that Izzy and Miss Richardson handled the situation.
Totally.
Honestly, primarily more Izzy, because she came home, asked her mom to start scooping into this and snooping into it. And I just thought it was kind of Izzy taking ownership of the story of Mia and Pearl. No one gave her the right or the recommendation to go out and search further. Even Pearl was saying, I don't want to tell my mom yet. Like, I don't know what to do with this yet. And it felt like she was almost forced to tell this story faster than she wanted to.
Right.
Which then led to this uncomfortable moment with her mom later on.
Which I think is interesting, that Izzy would go ask her mom rather than ask Mia herself, knowing that Mia has more of a hold on Izzy and has more of like an actual understanding relationship with Izzy. And Elena, Izzy's actual mom, doesn't seem to have like any openness toward her, a lot of hostility. And we find out in these chapters that hostility is rooted in so much care too. But regardless of that, knowing that Izzy doesn't have a very strong relationship with her mom, I think it's interesting that Izzy chooses to talk to her mom rather than Mia herself.
And I also think it shows the connection that Izzy still has to her mom.
Okay.
Maybe not intentionally, but just the way that they both kind of snoop. It shows that the environment that she grew up in is the environment that she now presents.
Right, for sure.
And this story is going to continue on later in the chapters. But you want to talk about Elena and Izzy.
Well, like I said, how Elena and Izzy, they're in this present moment, they have a very rocky relationship. Elena likes to pick on Izzy, likes to tell Izzy that what she's doing is wrong or inappropriate, and Izzy looks like she's acting out, but what she's really doing is just sticking up for her own beliefs, which doesn't really jive well with the rest of the community. This community has many roles. Shaker Heights has a way of viewing what is appropriate for certain situations, down to the point of the color of their homes. So it's interesting. We learn the backstory behind why there's this tension between them. How during her pregnancy, Elena had a lot of issues to the point that she gave birth to Izzy much earlier than expected. And because of that, the doctors said it's possible that there can be a lot of illnesses ahead. It's possible that Izzy might die from one of these illnesses. And because of that care, and because of Elena watching over Izzy so carefully, questioning everything that she's doing, it becomes resentment. And which is what brings us to the present, where Izzy resents her mom for caring the way that she does, and Elena resents Izzy for having this spark that she used to have that she can no longer access, but also wanting to protect her daughter in a way that is out of her control.
Right, and I think this is the discrepancy in the relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm.
I think Elena genuinely loves Izzy so much because of the
Yeah.
fears that she grew up with,
Right.
or that she grew up with while Lizzie was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Izzy's ever understood that. I don't think she's ever gotten the understanding that the action she takes may be more dangerous.
Definitely. I noticed that there are a lot of mother-daughter relationships and juxtapositions throughout. So there's Elena and Izzy. What are your thoughts on Pearl and Mia's relationship thus far from what we've read?
It seems very interesting that it is so off course from the picture that they've originally presented.
How so?
When they first entered Shaker Heights, it seemed that they were a strong duo. They didn't leave each other's side. They seemed very much connected and open and honest with each other.
Yeah.
As the stories developed, it seems that Mia has now had to go to the lengths of not spying on Pearl, but kind of spying on her by being the housekeeper for the Richardsons. Pearl has done a lot of things that she has now gone behind the back of her mother, which those stories were never presented. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, but we don't know those stories. So it seems like that relationship is now being maybe not severed, but definitely it has some cracks in it.
So when you see their relationship, you see brokenness?
Not brokenness, but I see that it is no longer as tight of a bond as it used to be. They're no longer so conjoined. It seems that Pearl is now trying to live her own life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Mia notices that, and she, even though she is the housekeeper for the Richardsons, she also does say and acknowledge in the book that Mia is a teenager and she's going to let her be. Yeah, and I also see that there is a shift in their relationship, but I've also noticed that there are instances where that bond is still strong. For example, when you mentioned how they brought up the picture with Mia and Pearl in it, the mother and child. Yes, when they brought up
Virgin and Child number 1.
When they brought up Virgin and Child number 1, when they first discovered it together, and Pearl brought it up to Mia with the Richardson kids with her, there was a moment when Pearl acknowledged, oh no, I shouldn't have done this. I know that it's not the way I should have approached my mom about it. I should have waited until we were home. That realization to me shows me that that relationship is still fairly strong, though it might be changing.
Well, that's where I think some of the change is happening. Is this is an action that Mia has done a long time ago, where this photo was taken of her so long ago. By Pearl finding this and now trying to discover this story of her mom, it's kind of like finding out that Santa isn't real. It's this discovery of who the parent is. It shows a humanistic side to the parent, whereas usually a lot of kids look up to their parents as not deities, but pretty much this very perfect structure. So I think that's where I consider their relationship to be changing, and maybe not broken, but definitely not as honest, not as open as maybe Pearl once thought it might have been. Because I think the other parts of the story where Miss Richardson then goes on to ask about, we'll come to this later, but where Miss Richardson interrogates Pearl about her mom and where she came from, I think then Pearl goes into this thought process of realizing that she doesn't know her mom's background as much as she thought she did, or just maybe never even thought to ask of it.
So going into that discussion where Elena and Lexi and Izzy as well as Pearl are at that luncheon celebrating Lexi, I saw that instance a little differently. Pearl's answers to Elena showed me that she acknowledged that she didn't know these things and that she tried asking in the past and never got anywhere with it. I do see how Pearl is now seeing that she can chip at it a little bit, but because of the way that she started chipping at it, and seeing her mom close off, realized that, well, I'm not going to look for it I'm not going to keep looking for it. Unlike Izzy and Elena, they saw the chip and now they're continuing to hammer it in.
Mm-hmm. So since we're speaking of that conversation, in my eyes, another big moment within these 5 chapters was... So I listened to this on audiobook. I was driving, and I got so heated. This was a very strong moment with a lot of information that was very subtle and underlying the content of what Miss Richardson was saying. How did you perceive how Miss Richardson was talking to and interrogating Pearl and, bringing Pearl to this luncheon to quote-unquote celebrate Lexi?
It was absolutely unfair to everyone at that table. It was unfair to Lexi, who they're supposed to be celebrating. It's unfair to Izzy, who was supposed to be having this moment with her sibling and her mom. And it was unfair to Pearl to be bringing her into this hostile conversation and continuing to essentially put her under fire. Like, Elena was doing bad at all fronts.
Yeah, there were a couple of really big moments in here that I thought just shined on who Miss Richardson is.
Oh, yeah.
One of the parts that she talked about quite a bit was about travel. Because the big goal of talking about travel was to get to the point of finding out where Mia was at the time that this photo was taken to see if this could confirm that it was Mia. But some of the things that she said were, I truly believe that there's nothing like travel to broaden a young person's perspective. Which it sounded like Miss Richardson was trying to undermine the fact that Pearl, which I think then includes Pearl and Mia, didn't have the experience to understand the world as well because they didn't travel.
They weren't cultured enough.
Because then Pearl talks about how they've been through so many states and so many places.
Right.
So actually, she's probably the most traveled out of everyone at that table.
Exactly.
But then Miss Richardson comes back with a very condescending tone of, you really have been all over. Quite the traveler, actually. And do you like it, moving around so much? And it's so condescending. It's so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Because you just said that traveling was good. It was good to see the world.
Right.
And they're not even traveling to visit, which is probably what Miss Richardson does when she does go on trips, is to visit and take culture and pieces, which she also talks about.
Going to Boston and seeing Paul Revere's house and seeing the Tea Party. And while I was reading that, I was like, lady, that is not the purpose of traveling, is not to go to the sites and whatever.
And it's like she pretty much talks about taking culture.
Yes.
Whereas there's no better way to absorb culture than to truly live there, which is what Mia and Pearl does in many different states.
Exactly.
So it's not about the fact of travel. It's just Miss Richardson just looking down on them.
Exactly. Trying to steer the conversation so that it looks good on her and not good in anyone else outside of her.
And then she goes on to talk about the roots. She says, I believe in knowing where your roots lie. Which is hilarious because the roots that Miss Richardson and her family have in Shaker Heights are so shallow. It's people that have now emigrated to this country through Ellis Island. Then they have established this place that was probably already established by people.
Right.
And then her grandfather, I think it was, has taken this land over and built this quote-unquote idyllic community that they have. And then the worst part was that one of the things that Pearl talked about was how she felt like nomads, modern-day gypsies. She said they were descended from circus folk, which to me makes it sound like that's how Pearl feels about her current situation and having to migrate through so many different cities. But then Lexi goes on to say, do you think your mom would know when her ancestors came over? Which in the book it immediately follows that with Miss Richardson trying to change the conversation, because I'm sure Miss Richardson realizes, when her ancestors came over, most likely not by choice.
Right. It just shows the privilege, it shows the ignorance, it shows a lot of harm. Just harm being done in this one conversation.
Yeah, and it just, it was bad.
Yeah, it was super bad. Ay.
Yeah, I cannot imagine having been at the table right next to them.
Right.
As this conversation was happening.
Right.
I would have probably not said anything, but I would have probably came home and said a lot. Because that was brutal.
I would have probably not said anything either, but I would have turned around and gave a face and let them know, not all of them, but specifically Mrs. Richardson. I would have gave her an eye and be like, no. Also, I want to acknowledge that gypsies is it's not a great term and not a term that we should be repeating, but it was in the book.
So it was important to me because the way that Pearl made this sound was of her traveling as a nomad. I don't know if this was how it's supposed to sound, but it made it sound like she didn't see herself as more than Mrs. Richardson or even equal to Miss Richardson. She saw herself as someone inferior, and that's the terms of gypsies, which is, it's not great to use, but the terms of gypsies and circus folk have always been used in derogatory manners. So for Pearl to use that to describe her and her mom just made it feel so much more hurtful within this conversation of Miss Richardson talking down to Pearl this whole time.
Definitely. And I want to add another little observation in terms of talking down, in terms of this feeling of ickiness. I think it was interesting that many times when the book refers to Elena, they refer to her as Mrs. Richardson. But Mia is always just Mia.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and there's no particular reason for the distinction other than establishing that Elena is this character who thinks so highly of herself, and Mia just being who she is and also not caring. Like Elena mentions that Mia really doesn't care what other people think of her.
And so there's one more mother-daughter relationship that was talked about in these chapters.
Yes, spotlighted a lot.
Which is another huge one. It seems like such a side plot, but it is, I'm sure, going to be something that is going to come up and hit the front of the cover. And that one was the one between, well, it's actually, I guess, mothers maybe, but the McCullochs and Bibi. And their daughter, who her name is Mei Ling, her name that is put onto her is Mirabelle. And this story is definitely, like the word that you used, it's definitely highlighted within these chapters.
Definitely. So let's talk about the character map for these people, because for those of you who didn't read it or who are not going to read it, let's lay it out. Essentially, Bibi Chow, when she gave birth to Mei Ling, she was in a very dark place. Her husband left her, she didn't have a steady job, she was experiencing postpartum depression, and she had a big breakdown. So she leaves Mei Ling at a fire station knowing that they would take care of her. Then the McCullochs come in. They're a married couple, they've been trying to have children, they've had 5 pregnancies and lost all 5, unfortunately. And they were filing for adoption. There weren't any leads until they heard of this child, Mei Ling, who was found at the fire station, and a social worker brought them this little child. So they've renamed her, like Steven said, Mirabelle, and refused to call her anything else but Mirabelle, even though the social worker showed the note that Bibi wrote saying that her name is Mei Ling. So, the big thing here, the reason why things exploded or are starting to explode, is that Bibi wants her baby back. It has been 10 months. She's had time to settle into herself, find a better situation. And because of Mia, who's heard from somebody from the Richardsons who were at the party mention Mei Ling's story. And because of this she had a feeling that this baby is Mei Ling.
Right, because Mia works with Bibi at the
Yes.
Chinese restaurant
Yes,
part-time.
exactly.
And as the story tells it, is Mia is someone who is transcendent usually, so she's not connecting with, she's avoiding connecting with people.
Right.
But something about
Bibi.
Bibi made her want to connect. And that's when this story came out from Bibi to Mia. So when this Chinese baby who was abandoned, quote unquote abandoned, was
Right.
When she heard the story, that's when Mia automatically connected it with Bibi's story.
Yes, and so Bibi wants Mei Ling back, but the McCullows are very set on not giving her back.
Yeah, they are going to the lengths of doing the thing that a lot of white American people love doing, which is calling the police, not hearing people out. They have been avoiding phone calls. They are not answering the door when she knocks. To be somewhat fair, it seems like Bibi's going in with some hot energy, which I don't, if someone came into our door and started yelling about a baby missing, I don't know if I'd answer the door 100%, but at least a phone call, like a phone call doesn't hurt. Like she can't hurt you over the phone. Just answer the phone.
She did answer the phone, but she hung up on
yeah,
her too.
you're right. You're
yeah,
right.
Which is, so going off of that, I think that Bibi came in kindly that way. She did call first.
Yes.
And the problem is when Mrs. McCullough hung up on her, that's when she came in with fire. Which is why I understand where Bibi's coming from. If my child were in somebody else's house and I kindly came to them through a phone call before showing up, I feel like that's more than enough kindness if you're going to hold my child hostage from me.
And not to mention that for Bibi, this isn't a story that's just popping up. It's something that has haunted her every night.
Right.
So,
for 10 months.
Yeah, so it's not like she's going to come in with this super calm, oh, how are you doing? I'd love to get my baby back. She's already in the midst of a fight for her child.
Right, exactly. So the story then progresses to Mia giving Bibi advice, and we don't know what that advice is until the following chapter, where Bibi shows up on the news, telling her story, wanting her child back, taking the initiative and being the forefront of the narrative, essentially. So it starts this battle of lawyers. Even though Bibi is not able to afford a lawyer, somebody comes up and says, I will represent you. The McCullows have their own lawyer. And, surprise, surprise, not surprise, the McCullows have William Richardson, which is the father of the Richardson family.
Which they're connected through, the McCullows are connected to the Richardsons through Elena, because they went to high school together, I think.
Elena and Linda, Mrs. McCullough, went to high school together and are best friends. So they enlist Mr. Richardson's help, and now they're in a battle of who's going to get custody of Mei Ling.
This is a little bit off topic, but one important thing that I wanted to mention is for those that are listening to the audiobook, as soon as I heard Bibi's voice, I kind of got a little cringe with the scared...
The
fear of the fact that it might be someone who is not Asian portraying a very strong Asian accent. And I looked it up. The narration is all done by Jennifer Lim, so cleared that a little bit. Yeah, that was honestly, I was a little scared about it.
Totally. I mean, I think I already knew who the narrator was when I listened to the audiobook, which is why I cruised through it and was like, yes, I can trust who's speaking. But when you brought it up to me, when you were experiencing that portion, I totally understood where you're coming from.
So, do you have a side that you choose?
So, when I first read it, I definitely had a strong side. I was like, Bibi all the way. When I read it this next time, I knew already what's going to happen, but I stepped back and looked at reasonings. Like, Bibi is the birth mother. Bibi was doing the best that she could. with what she had, and now she wants her child back. Legal system be damned. With the McCullows, they have money, they have comfort, they have love, side little asterisk, love question mark. But the point is that the McCullows have resources and BB does not. But in the end, I'm still Team BB.
Yeah, there's a part where it came from Mr. Richardson talking about how they had better opportunities to support the child, which I agreed with. But at the same time, your support of the child doesn't necessarily have to be just you raising that child. The way that they have been handling the situation of trying to block out the mother has also not been the thing that I would ever support, especially when BB truly wants to be a good mother. I mean, this is the difference between the privilege that some people have and the difficulties that other people have of trying to make it in America. The story that BB tells is that she was left here by her husband, who originally wanted to come to the States. It wasn't BB's choice to come here. She never hoped that she would be in a situation where she would have to struggle to get by. But she's been trying to make it work, and I think for someone who wants to take care of her baby that much, she deserves an opportunity to then go forth with that chance.
Right. And like the question about the resources is like stepping back and like coming out of the story and knowing why resources are so few and far between for communities of color versus white communities. It's not the individual's fault, it's the system's. So it's not fair to only look at BB from the point of she doesn't have money.
Right, but more so than that, I mean, if you notice as the Richards, or not as the Richardsons,
The McCullows.
As the McCullochs, if you notice this scenario, you clearly have resources that you can find because you understand the American system a lot better. And if you truly want to help this baby, then help her reunite with her mother, teach them how to find resources, and then move them along.
Or just be the benefactor.
Yeah, but what they want is they want their child. They feel like they deserve to have this child. This is something that they were blessed with, and it was kind of like their manifest destiny of taking ownership of this baby. And I think that's the bigger problem.
Exactly. And that was what I landed on. It's the finders keepers of all of this. It's like, no, she is not yours. She is not yours to keep. She is not your property. She is not a thing that you can decide for yourselves. Mailing is a human. Mailing has more value outside of being, quote unquote, your child.
So one of the other aspects that kind of leads us into our next point is the way that Lexi has been feeling when she first saw Mei Ling.
So it goes from babies to baby making.
Yes, and that is the theme of chapter 12, which I titled our sex episode. Because that's all it, like the whole, this is what is it, Twilight 2.5 or something? Where it's just all about the boom boom, the shaky shaky. And so it starts off with Pearl and Trent. So it starts off with Pearl and
Trip.
So it starts off with Pearl and Trip. And whoever says math isn't sexy needs to read this book. This is why Asian men are very attractive.
Yes. Oh my gosh. When I came across that line when I came across the line where they crossed the line, oh my gosh, I literally fell back on my seat like, oh, what?
Yeah, it happened very quickly.
Yes.
It sounds like for Trip, it also happened very quickly. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel a little gross. I'm not rooting for this love story.
So, even when I first read it, I wasn't really rooting for the love story, but this second time around, knowing what I do know, I've become Mia. I'm like, she's a teenager. Let her live her life. Let her make good choices. Let her be.
Which is fine. Like, her exploring is completely fine. but I still don't. Trip is not the right. I'd rather her be with Moody, someone else. Maybe not Moody.
Nope,
He's not great
Moody.
either.
No, not
But
Moody.
I just wouldn't. I don't know. I just don't see how this is ever gonna work out. Which obviously we'll find out. But it's not a relationship I'm rooting for.
That's fair. So there's that baby making, and then there's Lexi and her boyfriend Brian, which
Is real baby making.
was real baby making, and unfortunately Lexi and Brian haven't been making really good choices in staying protected, which then leads to actually making a baby.
Right. And then it leads to
Lexi having to battle within herself what her steps forward are. She is a high school student entering college the following year, so is her boyfriend, and then realizing that this is not the time for her to raise a child. She then makes a decision to have an abortion. And the way that she goes about it is very interesting in that she calls Pearl, of all people, to go with her, which I get it. I get that Pearl is a very understanding person, I guess, towards Lexi. She is kind of sidekicky to Lexi, which I also see issue with. But what makes me actually irate is how she puts Pearl's name down instead of her own.
Which makes me wonder if that's the main reason she called Pearl in the first place.
I thought about that after the fact too.
Yeah. I don't think it happened by circumstance.
Right.
Lexi's a smart girl. She got into Yale.
Yeah.
She's a very smart girl.
Yeah.
She had, just like Pearl said, she had her other friends that she could have called. Friends that she knew for way longer.
Right.
But she calls up Pearl, this person that already doesn't fit into society. And when the person at the counter asks Lexi for her name,
Yes.
there is no hesitation. So for her to be that confident with that name, I don't think it happened by accident.
That's true.
Also for Celeste Ng, the author, to write this chapter in the way that she did,
Right.
with Pearl being the first to start off in these encounters and talk about sex in the way that it happened.
Right.
It was, to me, it was very thought out in creating plausibility of Pearl being the person that might be the one that's actually pregnant. Because clearly this is something that's going to develop into a story.
Right.
There's no way that this is the end of an abortion piece of the actual book.
Yep, because we're just in the middle. We just hit the halfway point.
Yep. And so clearly this is going to come back. And for us to truly believe that Pearl, this once innocent girl that couldn't talk to crushes that she had,
Right.
to now be involved in this relationship, I guess, with Trip on multiple encounters,
Right.
then shows us, okay, she can be the one that is actually pregnant. So when a lot of stuff comes her way, which I'm sure is bound to happen, it gives us the plausibility of, okay, I can see why the other people are going to see Pearl the way that they do.
Right, definitely. Ugh, I hate that Lexi used Pearl. Now that I step back, like, I knew that she was using Pearl, but you're right. There was so much confidence with Lexi saying Pearl's name.
Yeah.
I'm so disappointed.
There's a little side piece here in the story that I loved and hated this quote at the same time. But we find out a little bit more about Brian, and we know that he is black.
Yes.
So one thing that Brian then mentions is that when the talk of pregnancy comes up from Lexi at the age of 18, this is a quote from the book, but Brian goes on to say, "Oh, look, another black kid knocked a girl up before he even graduated from high school. More teen parents, probably going to drop out now." And it just shows you what Shaker Heights really is. I think this then goes on to further set up the scenario for Pearl, who is this black girl in this community.
Right.
And for Brian to feel the way that he does as already a part of this community,
Yes.
and for him to feel that everyone's already going to judge him, I can only imagine the stuff that's going to come on to Pearl later.
Right, exactly. Oh, so much weight on Pearl. And Mia as well, but like Pearl, oh my gosh. Interrogations being used. Ugh.
Yeah, she's finding out things about her mom that she didn't really expect to find out.
Right. Discovery. Ugh.
Right.
So much.
And then, so I lied. There's actually one more mother-daughter relationship in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one that Elena discovers towards the end of chapter 12.
Right.
This is the relationship between Mia and her mom, Mrs. Wright.
Mm-hmm.
I hated the way that Elena went through this process. So deceitful, so manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
This also shows the difference between Elena going to the house of somebody and Bibi going to the house of somebody.
Right.
They're both going in for a tactic and a reason.
Right.
But clearly Elena comes out with something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes out with exactly what she wants.
More than what she wants. She finds out more about Mia's past. More than she even came there for. Knowing that there were these people named the Ryans who were also involved.
Right.
Which starts another inciting event.
Yeah.
So much in store.
Yes. So we have just finished up chapter 12.
Mm-hmm.
We are now going to go in through chapter 13 through 16,
Mm-hmm.
which are pages 187 to 269.
If you're following on the ebook.
On the hardcover copy, 187 through 269.
It's the same numbers.
On the any copy, 187 through 269.
Yes. So what are your predictions in this next portion? So we did talk about several inciting events, such as Bibi Chow and the McCullough with Mei Ling, such as Lexi and getting abortion, with Elena finding out about Mia's life and where she came from.
Yeah. Let me lay this out for you. So Bibi is going to be in this fight with these people, these McCulloughs.
Yes.
Things are not going to go well for her. She's going to fight to the death. And I don't see it becoming extremely successful in court. I hope there are other ways that she is able to find her way to her child. Mm-hmm. But then we go to Lexi and Pearl. Mm-hmm. I think Pearl is going to take the backlash of what Lexi's done. Mm-hmm. Shaker Heights is a small city, so somebody has to have seen them go into it. I mean, Mr. Yang, the guy that lives upstairs, saw
Pearl and Trip.
So he said he's not going to do anything, though.
Right.
I trust him. But the fact that he even sees those interactions, everyone sees everything in a small town.
Yep.
And then the relationship between Elena and Mia is going to start coming in hot. Because Elena, I don't think she's one that knows how to keep her mouth shut. I think things are going to be talked about left and right. Elena's not going to stop snooping. She's probably going to go even harder at this. And I think she's going to start showing how much she looks down upon the Warrens.
Specifically.
Very specifically. And I don't think Mia's going to want to just sit there and just
take it.
Yes.
So, as y'all know, I've read it before, so I can't really give predictions about the story itself. But like I said earlier in previous episodes, I think that I'm going to see even more details and see just how microaggressive Elena is. And like, I'm probably going to feel it even more when Bibi goes through her fight against the McCulloughs. And I'm also probably going to feel even more empathy towards Pearl and seeing just how much weight is on her shoulders.
And you mentioned in the first episode that you noticed that there were different scenes that utilized Chekhov's gun.
Yes.
Did you find one within what we read?
There are so many Chekhov's guns, but one specifically on page 169 where Pearl says to Trip after one of their little sessions, She says, "I don't mind being a secret," she said, and kissed him. And I was like, no!
Yes. So we see little fires burning everywhere.
Yes.
Things are starting to happen.
Sparks are happening and flying.
So we will then see what happens with chapters 13 through 16. But for anyone that wants to be a part of this conversation, for anyone that wants to share their opinion, how can they contact us?
You can write us notes to our email address at asianbookclubpod, P-O-D, @gmail.com, or you can send us a DM, while our DMs are still open, on Instagram at asianbookclubpod, P-O-D.
And we also have a bookshop where you can look at the selections that we have, or you can order books as well.
Yes, and any book that you order through our bookshop, we get a little something back.
Yes, and that site is bookshop.org/shop/Asian Book Club Pod.
Yes.
And one thing that I've been trying to figure out is how do we do an outro on these segments, because it all comes a little bit abrupt. So I'm going to try out a couple of different things. I'm going to try one out at the end of each episode. So stick around and we'll maybe eventually find one. Maybe we never find one. But to end this, I'm just going to tell you, we'll see you at the next chapter.
Bye.